You're listening to the Swap Society podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Robertson. I interview thought leaders and change makers who are working to create a more sustainable and equitable world through fashion, art, and activism. Join us for a dose of climate optimism as we envision a brighter future. Hey everyone, welcome to the Swap Society podcast. Today, I'm so excited to be talking with Zero Waste Guide, Jonathan Levy. He's a waste and recycling consultant. Hey Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hey Nicole, thanks for having me.
So good to see you and thank you for chatting. So first things first, where are you talking to us from today and where are you from originally?
So I'm from Pasadena, I am speaking with you from Pasadena, but I'm originally from the Bay Area. I moved down to Southern California to go to Cal Poly Pomona, and it's been over 20 years now that I've been in Southern California, so I feel like I'm officially a Southern Californian, although I've never actually lived in the city of LA in all these years of being down here.
You're adjacent, LA County. That's
Definitely.
Close enough. Okay, so you are a waste and recycling consultant. How did you get into that?
It depends on how much time you have. No, I was
about an hour.
I was working in a Target warehouse. It was nearly 2 million square feet in the Bakersfield area. So yeah, I see your eyes light up. 2 million square feet, literally was like a quarter mile wide by a half a mile long. And I was like an operations supervisor, and I oversaw the mechanics who maintained all the conveyor belts and forklifts and all the equipment. And I didn't really know what, this was 10 years ago. I didn't know what zero waste was at the time. I just felt like I was working in this environment where I was helping optimize the flow of lots of single-use disposable consumer goods, and, trying to get them through the warehouse as quickly as possible. This was essentially like the distribution center for about 75 targets, like the back room, right, of 75 targets from like Fresno south into Southern California. And I just felt like the work I was doing didn't align with my values. Like I said, I didn't know what zero waste specifically was, but I felt like I wanted to be part of like some sort of solution. Whereas by optimizing the flow of disposable stuff, I felt like I was more of the problem. I got this idea that maybe if I went to the very end of the line, the garbage, the disposal, then I could work my way backwards and help businesses take steps to help, reduce waste, be more sustainable, more recyclable, whatever. Of course, it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. And now 10 years later, I'm pretty ingrained, entrenched that like waste is the area that I want to work in.
It seems like the more you learn about all of this, at least from my perspective, it does seem kind of like this endless zone of information. Like you just can keep learning more and more. And there's so many nuances. And I think a lot of people just think, oh, I have a recycling bin. I'm just going to throw this in the recycling bin and everything is going to be peachy keen and happy at the end. But as we know, that's not really the case. So I definitely have a lot of questions for you. One thing I really want to ask, though, it sounds like you're working with businesses that are looking to be more sustainable. Do you feel like the strategies that you're implementing are really making a lot of positive change? Or do you feel like the systems as they are in place right now we're still kind of in this uphill battle?
Yeah, well, you touched on something really, really that I think important is that most people, the biggest barrier to progress from my perspective is people tell me that they are putting material in a recycle bin, so therefore it's getting recycled. So they're already doing their part. And they don't really think about how recycling is like the very last thing in the decision-making process that you should be doing. You should be trying to just reduce waste to begin with by buying more durable products, whatnot, or maybe swapping your clothes when you're done with them when you don't like the style anymore, but somebody else does. So there's a lot of things that you could do before recycling, and yet most businesses, most cities, most waste haulers have relied on recycling to be the solution. And as we're learning now, recycling in and of itself has only been around, like residential curbside recycling, specifically in California, has only really been around since the early 90s. And a lot of places, even up until the past few years, didn't even have like residential recycling programs. So recycling has been like the linchpin. And for this entire time, we relied on shipping most of these recyclables to be processed to China. And it was kind of a set it it's not going into our landfill. It's not going into our incinerator. So therefore, we're just kind of wiping our hands of it. We're shipping it to Asia, and we're hoping for the best. And then, of course, in 2017, China changed their policies to where they basically, I mean, they gave lots of notice, but November of 2017, they just like literally pulled the plug and they said, we don't want your garbage anymore. And it turned out that about 2/3 of all the Western world's recyclables, quote unquote recyclables, were getting shipped to China to be processed. When China stopped accepting them, all of a sudden, we in America, specifically, I can speak to America, right, found ourselves with all this material and nothing to do with it because we realized that it wasn't as clean, it wasn't as recyclable, it wasn't as valuable as we thought. And like in Pasadena, where I live, and I think I'm getting to your answer eventually. Like I live in Pasadena, and I live in an apartment, so I have a different waste hauler. But the city hauls their own trash and recycling for residential, and the city of Pasadena used to sell their recyclables for $30 a ton. So that paid for all their programs. And now they are incurring about $70 per ton processing fee for that same blue bin recyclable material that they used to sell. So literally it was like $100 swing. And the reality is every month, the material recovery facilities that are trying to sort through these materials and recover them and sell them, it's finding out that only maybe on a good month, 30, 40, 50%, on a good month, 50%, but usually it's more like 40% of the material that gets put in is recovered and baled and sold or somehow shipped somewhere to be processed. 50 to 60%, easily more than half of what we're putting in a blue recycle bin is not getting recycled. So the biggest barrier is this, to get back to the original question, right? The biggest barrier to progress is people feeling like this recycling program they've been relying on their whole lives, especially if you're, Gen X or younger, right? Your entire life you've grown up in California with a recycle bin at your house. And now it turns out that for a lot of people, a rude awakening, that's not really a good, that's not the best option. It's not really as good of a solution as most of us had thought it was, which is bad in a lot of ways, but it's also good because it creates opportunity. Now we can't just throw it in a recycle bin and consider it done. We have to really look at the materials that we're generating and see if there's better options. Or we get to say we don't care. Oh, it's just plastic. We're just going to throw it in the landfill and it'll just, sit there forever, which is the other thing that I get is a lot of people like, oh, it's just sitting in a landfill forever. So who cares? So
I'll be dead by then. Whatever. Yeah. Yeah. Um,
sorry, that was a lot to unpack.
no, it's good. I love it. I think that yeah, I think that a lot of people don't realize that the things that they put in the recycle bin don't actually get recycled, even if they're recyclable items. What are some of, and I'd love to kind of get into the nitty gritty here a little bit about what's recyclable and what's not recyclable. And I know that to a certain extent that depends on where you live and what your local waste haulers are taking in as recyclable. But there are there are those numbers on the plastic. For example, I live in LA, in LA County, they tell us to put all the plastics, all the metals, so tin cans, etc., all the paper, all into one big bin. And then they come by and they dump it into a big truck and then it's getting sorted. I've heard that only really big things kind of wind up getting sorted, that if it's something really small, that it's just like a goner, right?
That lots to unpack there. I mean, so one thing I'll say is most plastic is recyclable in some capacity. The biggest issue is most of us rely on like curbside residential recycling programs and what the, recyclables are commodities on a market. So somebody has to, first of all, like you said, depending on where you live, the capabilities of the waste hauler or the processing facility, some facilities are better at capturing material than others. But at the end of the day, they still need somebody who's willing to purchase the material, or in some cases, collect it. Maybe they'll pay to get rid of it because it's cheaper for them to pay someone to take it to have it recycled than it is to put it in a landfill. Or if a city or waste hauler needs to meet their waste diversion from landfill goals, they might be willing to pay for a material to be diverted from the landfill as opposed to selling it because it's worth it for them to maintain their contracts. The first thing is like, I'm not a scientist, but I'm sure a lot of a lot of plastics are recyclable or downcyclable into something lower quality. But the issue really is like the ability to actually find a market for that material. And I know that there's been a big whiplash since, even though it's been 5 years since we were shipping material to China to be recycled, but still 5 years is not a long time in a sense of like infrastructure, right? So it really depends, but generally speaking, plastics, number one is like poly PET. It's like a lot of water bottles, soda bottles, Starbucks cups. Generally speaking, those are considered recyclable. Number two is HDPE, high density polyethylene. That's more like detergent bottles and 5-gallon buckets. That's generally considered recyclable in residential programs. Plastic number three is PVC, like PVC pipe, polyvinyl chloride. That's generally not recyclable, even though it has that little recycle logo on it identifying it. Four is low density polyethylene, which is like a grocery bag. Those are, if you put enough of one thing together, like a lot of grocery stores used to they would say, bring your grocery bags back. They would make a big bale of them, or they would backhaul them to their distribution center, and they would potentially sell that material. But most processors do not want single loose bags of any kind in their infrastructure because it literally gets stuck in conveyor belts, stuck in just the equipment that's used to process. So a lot of facilities, if you watch them in action, you'll see, because all these, even the fanciest material recovery facility still has humans in there, people in there interacting with our material. And one thing I typically see, the ones that have more technology, is if they see a loose bag, they'll pull it off and they'll put it right up in the little suction thing, and it just disappears. And I don't know what happens to it, but my understanding is it typically get thrown away. So number five is polypropylene, yogurt containers, a lot of food service containers, a lot of cups, like a iced coffee at Starbucks will probably come in a number five polypropylene cup. Depending on where you live, that's generally considered recyclable. Number six is polystyrene or expanded polystyrene, which is styrofoam, cups, lids, straws, a lot of lower quality items. And of course, styrofoam is like the most infamous food service packaging, which of course, as you know, the closer you get to the ocean, the less people like that because it just kind of breaks up into little pieces. That's generally not considered recyclable. And then number seven seems to be a catch-all for anything that is not otherwise labeled. So the biggest issue, like, I wish I knew off the top of my head the name of this legislation, but it's called, I believe, Truth in Labeling, and I believe it's signed into law in California, and it hasn't been implemented yet. But the gist of it is, if a manufacturer of a product wants to put the recycle logo, the little arrows on the package, it has to demonstrate that there's an actual market for that material to be recycled. So you go to a typical grocery store, you look at the frozen food bags and things like that. They typically have like a number 4 on them, and people put them in the recycle bin when they're not going to get recycled. So in theory, when this law, like I said, I forget the number, is fully realized, we will not be able to, maybe people won't change their habits, but at least there won't be a recycle logo on it with a claim to please recycle it or whatever, right? Because even if it doesn't, they don't necessarily say this is or is not recyclable, but they'll say it's got the little chasing arrows, it's got the number 4, and then it says, please recycle. Right? So much for that.
And puts it on the consumer, which it's not to say that we, the end user don't have responsibility, but there's also responsibility from the manufacturer. So there's this
of course. And that's been the biggest pushback, is the manufacturers have the money, right? Like, I remember when now we have a statewide plastic bag ban. It seems very limited to me because I see plenty of plastic bags in circulation, but like the film plastic or the thinner plastic grocery bags. And when city by city by city we're looking to ban those, you were seeing like, American Chemistry Council and DART, which is the largest producer of like disposable food serviceware. And like there was some manufacturer of plastic bags in South Carolina that spent like $3 million or something lobbying in Sacramento to delay the plastic bag ban implementation because apparently they do like $100 million a year, or they did $100 million a year worth of sales selling these grocery bags to all the grocers in California. So it was worth it for them to, lobby in California, because even if it costs them $3 million, but if they delay it by 1 year, they still protect their $100 million or whatever it was in revenue. So to your point, I don't want people to lose hope, right? Like a lot of it is out of our control. So we obviously have to do what we can to recycle right, recycle properly, and everything. But really, we need to educate the lawmakers in wherever you live, whether it's California or somewhere else in the country or world. You need to educate the lawmakers, because I guarantee you the lobbyists who are manufacturing all these products are not, they're obviously investing a lot of money to delay or prevent or do whatever they can to make bans of products not happen, to delay or prevent the responsibility of themselves to take responsibility for the full life cycle of the product. We call it extended producer responsibility. I know it's really big it's talked a lot about, in the fast fashion world. It's also talked a lot about with a lot of our consumer goods. You think about just even little things like a fluorescent light bulb or a battery, like a AA battery. Most people, they don't know what to do with it. They just throw it in the trash, or they think they know what to do with it, but it requires finding a county household hazardous waste collection site and then going out of your way to go there and find it. So most of us, I'm guilty of doing it too, is like with some things, we just don't know what to do. So we just throw it in the trash or we throw it in the recycle bin, and we hope for the best, right?
Wish cycling.
So, yeah.
When you were talking about kind of the market for recyclables, it made me think about, so before Swap Society, I used to actually work for a bioplastics manufacturer.
Really? I didn't know that.
Seems like a whole nother lifetime ago. And I remember I went to a plastics conference. I would sometimes go to these plastics conferences.
Yeah.
And so prior to that, I worked in the beauty industry. And so this was a major departure for me. And so it was definitely a big learning experience. And there were a lot of great things and but also a lot of learning that happened. But I remember I was at the hotel where the conference was, and pretty much everybody stayed in the same hotel. And I remember I was sitting in the hot tub, and I wound up talking to this other person that was in the hot tub with me who was also there. And I think he worked for one of the MRFs, like one of the recycling centers. But he said something that stuck with me. And this was a long time ago, but it always really stuck with me. And he said, recycling only makes sense if people buy things made from recycled materials. And I think that, it kind of goes back into that market where if you're not buying things made from recycled materials, just throwing things in the recycle bin isn't enough. It's like you're taking this like one-sided approach to it. I think that I bought recycled things before that, but I don't know if I had such a focus on it before that moment.
Yeah, it's a great observation, right? Because you need to keep that cycle going. And that's really what zero waste is all about, is about keeping the circularity, kind of like mimicking a natural cycle. Like when we don't, in nature, the leaves fall on the ground and then they just sit there. And then they sit there, and over time they break down, and worms and little critters kind of do their thing. And then before you know it, they break down their fresh soil. But leaves fall on the ground outside my apartment building, and the gardener comes with a 2-stroke leaf blower, blows them all over the place, makes a mess, and then ultimately just puts them in my dumpster. So that's really not replicating any type of natural cycle, right? So I totally get it. And I think we've been so marketed for so long that recycling is the solution to all of our waste problems that we've kind of missed the point. Like we don't even think logically about it. Like, wait, I'm throwing this like dirty, food soiled, random plastic item. You asked about like the size of things. I forgot to respond to that, but anything really generally accepted, anything that's like less than maybe 3 inches long will literally fall through the cracks at the facility and then just go to the residual, which is the code word for the landfill. So, this idea that like, oh, I'm putting, especially you use word in cosmetics, right? Like all these little makeup things they're tiny. They're probably not getting recycled unless you specifically brought them to a collection program that was going to take them, consolidate an entire truckload of them, and then send them for some sort of processing. But most residential, commercial recycling programs target beverage containers like soda bottles and soda cans, water bottles. Sorry, yes, you got me right. They like beverage containers that have in California the CRV, the California redemption value, but only like 10 or 12 states in the entire country have some sort of deposit program to get single-use beverage containers back to be recycled. So even that's like not even a very good program, right? If you think about it. But they target like normal consumer, everyday, regular consumer goods. So your yogurt container might get recycled, but this random piece of plastic that you have from something is probably not. Like I actually have a random piece of plastic. I think it goes to my tripod actually. It fell off or something. I don't know. This thing is tiny. It's definitely not going to get, it may not even an inch long. It's not going to get recycled if I put it into the recycle bin. And I mean, they wouldn't even have a way to identify what type of plastic it was. You have to send it to some sort of testing or something, right? Like, because it's not like a generally accepted, regular, everyday piece of item or piece of plastic item that we would normally use. So.
And you also mentioned number 7 earlier, and we talked a little bit about bioplastics. And I also want to mention that, bioplastics get the number 7 for the other. And I think there's a lot of confusion for people about what's compostable, what's not compostable. I think a lot of people think that, if it's compostable, I can throw it in my home compost, which is usually not the case. Most things aren't home compostable, but also bioplastics kind of muck up the recycling system a bit, don't they?
Well, I think that they seem to muck up everything. And, even if they are compostable, because the manufacturers of them will say that it's 180-day commercial compost approved. I forget the language that they use. That okay, it's compostable. However, from my experience, like I'm not a processor of compost, but from my experience talking with people who work at these facilities, they tend to put everything, all the material, through a screen. Like they screen it when it goes in, and they screen it when it comes out, and a lot of these, bioplastics just get screened out and thrown away. And the main reason is, if you're, it's one thing to look at your backyard compost pile or your compost bin, and you can see it. You can see how big maybe it weighs 50 pounds, but a commercial composter is probably processing several tons of material per day, 10 tons, 50 tons, 100 tons. They're not going to take the time to pick up every single cup and look to see if it's certified compostable or if it's just plastic, oil, crude based plastic. So most of this stuff just gets removed just because they don't know if it's compostable or not. But then on the flip side, like I said, different recovery facilities use different levels of technology, so I can't really speak to exactly the methodology for how they work. But in theory, a bioplastic cup might look the same as a polypropylene plastic cup and then get recovered into that stream. And now it's contaminating that stream because it's a different chemical, different makeup. It's not the same material. So generally speaking, bioplastics are not the solution. I see a lot of there's someone from Surfrider reached out. I'm on the Environmental Advisory Commission in Pasadena, and they wanted to create awareness for like sample ordinances to get rid of like most single-use plastic items. And the problem, I get it, and they want marine degradable to be okay. And I get it from their perspective. If every time you go to the beach, you see plastic waste, then yeah, you'd want it to be marine degradable. So if nothing else, it's just going to break down and it's not going to get stuck. It's not going to bother animals, and it's not going to be a nuisance on the beach because it's just going to break down. It's going to disappear. But if you're inland, and I get it, the water, the LA River flows into the ocean. So even if you're inland, that stuff can still make it in there. But it's definitely a tougher sell for something like that for people that don't look at the ocean on a regular basis to wrap their head around this idea of marine degradability, especially if it's more expensive. And of course, all these things that we're talking about doesn't change the fact that this is still all single-use disposable stuff. whether it's plastic, bamboo, coconut husk. I don't know. I've heard of like everything. It's all single use. It's all disposable. So that really doesn't really solve the problem. It's still a disposability convenience thing. I really struggle with my pushback to, even though understanding why they would want to ban all these single use plastics, my pushback is still, if we're going to replace one single use item with another, then are we really doing anything aside from just creating more laws for businesses to have to navigate and more expense, because all these things are always more expensive. And I know that was actually the biggest pushback when the whole thing about banning styrofoam in Pasadena came up, that one of the members of the city council, my council member, actually, he's very progressive and open and minded. And he said, well, if styrofoam was only like 0.1% of Pasadena's waste stream, then why are we even bothering to target that when there's a lot of other items out there? And he was, I think, along that same line of thinking that I've been thinking about, which a lot of people think I seem to think that means I'm like anti-environmentalist or pro-plastic or something. But like, if you're just replacing one disposable item with another disposable item, then why bother doing that? Because in a lot of ways, it doesn't solve the problem. It puts more of a financial burden on businesses, and it could also help give people the illusion or impression, or reinforce the idea that they're doing something better. They're using this higher quality item. But we don't really want items to go to a landfill and break down, because a lot of people are like, oh, it's plant-based, so it's just going to break down. But the problem is when you put organic material like food waste and yard waste, and in theory compostable items, in landfills, they break down and they leach methane gas into the atmosphere, which they say is at least 20 times more potent of a pollutant than CO2, than carbon dioxide. And a lot of landfills in the world don't have methane collection equipment. And a lot of the ones that do have it, my understanding is it still doesn't get the majority of the methane emissions that are the methane gas that's generated. So, more than half still, my understanding, still seeps out in the atmosphere. So, a lot of times using compostable items and things like that, if they're not processed properly, could be more harmful than just using the plastic one that's going to sit in a landfill for 400 years. At least it's not emitting methane, not breaking down and emitting methane gas at the same time. So I feel like I'm overwhelming you with information,
No.
but I think it speaks to just how like complex and nuanced the processing of our waste is. And there's so much inequity, and there's so many social justice issues. There's so many wealth issues. There's so many issues. And unfortunately, I don't have any of the solutions, because our system is just so heavily dependent upon single-use, one-time use disposable items. And I remember, I think it was a Story of Stuff by Annie Leonard, like 13 years ago, was just brought up this concept that I never really thought about, that we create these plastic products that are designed to last forever, but intended to only be used one time. And maybe something more, relatable for your typical follower. The same thing kind of applies to fast fashion. As we manufacture these clothes, well, they're not designed to last forever, right? They're just designed to last until the next season or whatever, or the next month. But they're made from material that is going to last forever, and it creates lots of waste and lots of issues. Like, you think about like sweatshops, and like, this is not my area of expertise at all, but you think about just the carbon footprint and environmental like issues that we have from manufacturing low quality clothes in unethical, unsavory environments, and chemical water discharge into rivers and all these things. This whole idea, like the plastic is like the same kind of thing, right? It's the same concept, right? It's like we're consuming an incredible amount of resources and emitting a lot of pollution, and expecting people who are far off somewhere else that we can't see and we don't interact with to work in these environments. It's easy to go down a rabbit hole and then get sad, but I don't want to
We're
do
going to
that.
turn it around. We're going to
Yeah,
turn
for
it around.
sure.
Well, and you mentioned textiles, and so I definitely want to touch on that a bit as well. What is going on in the LA area with regard to textile waste?
Yeah, so one actually really exciting thing that I've been supporting, LA City sanitation. Obviously, if you look at the city of Los Angeles, it's the largest city in California. It's like over 4 million people just in the city of LA. Everything that I do is based on legislation, because if there wasn't legislation saying you have to recycle or compost or donate food or label things accurately, then all we would see is that we would just throw everything in the trash. We would pick it up and we'd take it right to a landfill and dump it. We wouldn't think about any of this stuff. So Senate Bill 1383, it's trying to limit the emission of short-lived climate pollutants. So I mentioned methane gas earlier. It's it doesn't stay in the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas as long as CO2, but it's apparently like at least 20 times more potent. I've heard 20, I've heard 75 times. I don't know, but it's at least 20. It's generally accepted it's at least 20 times more potent than CO2. And it targets all organic waste. So SB 1383 regulates short-lived climate pollutants. When most of us think of those, we think of like compost, like things, we think of things that are compostable, like in a green container that we put outside on the curb or whatever, right? We think of food waste and yard waste are typically the only things that we think of. Food scraps, yard waste. We don't always think of other things that are compostable, such as food soiled paper. For example, like you go to most like fast food restaurants, they will wrap the food in some sort of paper, or maybe a pizza box. Like the top of the pizza box is clean, but the bottom is soiled. So the bottom of the pizza box, it might be soiled with like some pepperoni grease or something, right? It's not going to be recyclable anymore because it's contaminated with food waste. So that would be something that could be compostable. It also looks at, like I said, all kinds of organic waste. So in addition to green waste, there's tree clippings, palm fronds, which are typically can't put it in the green bin, but they're still compostable. So those are regulated by this law.
Wait. You can't put palm fronds in the green bin?
So the problem with palm fronds is they tend to be, especially like you look at palm trees and like they over time they kind of like they get all droopy and they look sad and they come down. All those things tend to be very tough, like a piece of plywood. And when you put things like palm fronds into your yard waste or organics or whatever it's called container, they tend to, when it gets to the processing facility, remove them because they have to, in order to mulch or compost yard waste, they always they call it like chip and grind. So it's like, like when if you see the tree trimmer outside, sometimes they'll have their own little grinder on site. They cut it, they immediately they put the wood right into the tree trimmer, and it grinds it on the spot. So palm fronds, or it would be like putting a 2x4 in this machine. It just clogs it up, jams it up, stops it, breaks it, whatever. So palm fronds, typically, most cities, if you look at the thing, if you look on their website, in the green waste container, it'll say no palm fronds. So you might be jamming up the city of LA's chipping and grinding equipment.
Well, I don't know that I'm personally doing that, but I think that I feel like I know a lot about waste, but that one just really, that was a new to me one. I never really thought about that.
Yeah. So it's interesting because the law doesn't care if it jams up equipment. They're just like, this is organic. So, paper, cardboard, things like we call them blue bin recyclable organics, right? Those are regulated in this, and also textiles are regulated. So that's where I'm coming back to the textile aspect of it, right? So the problem is, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it was like most textiles that are in circulation today are made in whole or in part with polyester or plastic of some kind, right? So a lot of things are cotton poly blend, and a lot of things are pure plastic, polyester, poly, nylon. Most carpet, I think like 95% of all carpet that's manufactured now is made from a type of plastic. It used to be like wool or other materials, but now it's mostly like uh, polypropylene or no PET. PET number one, like water bottles can get turned into carpet. A lot of nylon, and yeah, I think polypropylene as well. But the point is, a lot of textiles are made in whole or in part in plastic. But the city of LA, finally answer the question, right, is that I've been helping support through waste characterization studies is has identified textile waste as a problem in the waste stream because it is not something that, despite popular belief, a lot of people think that because clothing can be recycled, that therefore you can just put it in your recycle bin at your house and it's going to get recovered, or the Goodwill is going to somehow sort through everything and then they're going to take all your clothes that can't be resold and they're just going to magically turn them into new clothes, which sometimes that happens and sometimes it just gets thrown away, sometimes it gets turned into insulation, and sometimes it just gets shipped overseas. So this pilot project is trying to figure out the feasibility of collecting textiles, maybe in the blue bin or maybe in a separate container. And can you take them? Can you identify what type of material they are and then turn them into something else? So the pilot specifically is targeting textile scraps associated with mostly like trimming operations. Something I did not know, and most people probably don't realize, there are at least a few hundred businesses in and around downtown LA that all they do 12 hours a day, whatever, 20 hours a day, 5, 6 days, 7 days a week, is they trim those huge things of textiles, trim them to make, I don't know what they make with them. They kind of look like like a lot of it looks like tablecloth or maybe curtains material. And, there will be pieces of textile scraps that are maybe like 2, 3, 4 inches wide by 10 feet long sometimes. And they don't really there's nothing you can, there's some things you can do with them. I've heard of people like filling punching bags with them and or making dog beds out of them. But, the city of LA, through waste characterizations, which I've worked on for, 4 years now, in different parts of LA, they're identifying that there's like, I don't remember, 10 or 20 tons of textile scraps a day are being disposed in just the city of LA. And most of them are coming from the downtown area where they have all these trimming operations. So they've been working with different startups who, they're always startups, right? It's a great idea. People are like, and I've said this to people, people are always like, where's the opportunity? If you can take something that's being thrown into a landfill and you can somehow keep it out of the landfill without burning it, then there's an opportunity for you. So there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there who are saying, how can we take these textile scraps, divert them from the landfill, which meets social goals, it helps the waste haulers meet their contractual goals, and it potentially takes a material that literally hasn't been used because it was manufactured into something and then it was just trimmed, and now it still hasn't, we call it pre-consumer, meaning like it hasn't been sold yet. It's perfect condition, right? So there's got to be something we can do with it. They're having a little bit of a rude awakening though, because a lot of these startups are realizing that, they need to take like an entire trash truck worth of material at a time, which we're talking, 8, 10 or so tons of material. If they can't take an entire trash truck, then the waste hauling companies are not going to want to do business with them, because you can't, you can't make a route, you can't work, you can't, it's hard if you to tell a customer, for example, if they have everything I look at is like in terms of trash, right? They have a big dumpster emptied 6 days a week. You can't say to them, put your textile scraps in this recycle bin 1 day a week and then put them in the trash bin every other day, because that's confusing, right? They want to train their employees and they want to do it all. They want to be able to do it the same thing every single day. So I think that's the biggest challenge right now is like, how do you take 20 tons a day, 6 days a week of material bring it somewhere, identify what it is, and then find somebody who's willing to buy it from you or take it from you or in some way remanufacture it into something else. So it's a really interesting project that I've been supporting, not working directly on it, but supporting in that I oversee hundreds and hundreds of sorting through random samples of trash, recycling, and organic material and categorizing it into 30 plus categories. So then we can take that information back to our waste hauling clients and say, hey, we did the study and Route 32 by weight is like 60% food waste. So, you need to look at all your customers that are being serviced on Route 32, and you need to look at the ones that don't have organic or not subscribed to organics recycling and send your outreach staff to these businesses and get them to enroll, because clearly this is, there's an opportunity to improve your improve your diversion from landfill by increasing the amount of organic recycling containers that are in circulation and being used. So really interesting kind of problem solution to try and tackle.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, textile recycling rates are virtually non-existent. Almost, I think it's like globally, like less than 1% of textiles get recycled, actually recycled. Part of it is because there are so many blended fabrics. And so, there are startups, companies that are trying to work on chemical separation and recycling, to separate those things. I did an interview with Matoha. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they actually make these scanners. They started making plastic scanners that identify the type of plastic, but they've also come out with fabric scanners to help people who are trying to sort different types of textiles. But one of the other things too is that I actually learned from them, when it comes to chemical recycling, it makes sense, but you can't have more than 2 fibers, right? A lot of textiles are 3, 4, 5, sometimes even more blends. Some people are really going crazy. If you read the label, so many interesting stats from them though, too, where a lot of the labels are incorrect, for example. So you think that it's, 50 cotton, 50 poly, but maybe that's not actually the ratio. Sure. And so there's so much nuance there. But yeah, obviously, pre-consumer is a problem, post-consumer is a problem. How we dispose of our clothing has created a massive waste issue. There's a stat, it's maybe a little outdated now. It's from a few years ago, but there was a stat from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that every second a garbage truck of textiles is landfilled or incinerated.
I can tell you just from my experience that there are probably 2 full trash trucks worth of textiles being collected in the downtown LA area Monday through Saturday, year round. So that's just right somewhere.
That's just here.
Obviously there was American Apparel, there's other things, but most people, I think, when the typical, maybe you look at it differently, but the typical person doesn't think of LA and they don't think of textile waste, because I don't think we really think that we're manufacturing clothing or anything that would require so much textile waste, or that would generate so much textile waste as is generated. So I get it, right? If LA is not even known for textiles, and yet there's at least 20 tons a day of textile scraps, pre-consumer scraps, being disposed of 6 days a week. So
it's intense. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the problems and the kind of the nuances of the problems. I know that you are very much a zero waste person. I know that can sound really unattainable and overwhelming to people. What are some tips that you have for people that want to reduce their waste footprint? What are some things that people can get started with?
Well, the first thing is true zero waste is not possible, because we all live in you'd kind of have to live on a ranch in the middle of nowhere and generate your own power, go harvest, go raise your own food, whether it be animal or plants, and do everything, like you'd have to do everything in your own little bubble to be truly zero waste, because the reality is we work in, we live in a society that's just so disposable based, that a lot of waste is generated in a way that we don't even know it's happening. So uh the curtains I have in my apartment, there's probably 5 to 10% of the material associated with making these curtains was disposed of because it was trimmed, and I see the trimming, right? So is that my direct waste? No. But am I still responsible for it? Yes, because so I bought the new curtains, right? I bought curtains and there's waste associated with it, right? So I think the first thing is that want to let people know that like being truly zero waste is not possible. The mason jar of trash is great marketing, but it's not realistic to what most of us encounter every day. Most of us don't live, in America, don't live in a city where we don't need to own a car, where we can walk to a farmer's market, or we can afford to go to a farmer's market, right? So the first thing I like to preface is that like true zero waste is not really possible. So once you can, take a deep breath and like whoever's listening or watching, right? Like you're not like you are responsible because you purchase these things, but a lot of the waste associated with us, most of the waste that we generate is like behind the scenes. We don't see it, right? So that being said, I mean, I'm always been a big advocate for looking, and this was even before I knew zero waste, right? Look at everyday items that you used one time and then get rid of it, whether you throw it in a trash can, a recycle bin, a compost bin. Try to look for something that you can replace it with that is, more durable, more reusable, more repairable. And I know it's so hard, right? Most of our electronic devices, like our cell phones, like the iPhone that I'm using to speak with you, I don't know, I can't, like, Apple can't certify that all the minerals and resources that went into making it were done ethically. uh, I can't open it up to replace the battery, even if I wanted to. I've done it on previous ones, but this one is like, it's like so fused together. It's like not reasonable or even possible, I think, for a typical person to take it apart. So I like to say that just so people know that like it's okay. Like you're not, like there's only so much we can do. But the first thing is looking at everyday items that we use once and try to replace them with something that you could use twice or 3 times or 5 times. A lot of people the reusable grocery bags, they just don't like them because they get stinky or they get this or they break or they whatever. But maybe you just buy the 10-cent plastic bag at the grocery store that now, because they can't be single use, they're very thick. A lot of times you can use those 20, 30, 40 times before you have to get rid of them. So, even little steps, I like to try and meet people where they are, because I know I tried to go zero waste and vegan, like cold turkey, for lack of a better term, right? At the same time. And it was like immediately I was like, what can I eat and what can I buy? Because everything's got some sort of animal product in it, and everything I buy comes in some sort of packaging. And it was like a very like I went through it so you don't have to, right? So like I remember, like even before I knew what zero waste was, I was like, I don't like drinking coffee out of a disposable cup. It just feels weird. Like I'm sitting in a coffee shop. I want to like porcelain mug. I want to hold it in my hand. I want to like I want to sit there and enjoy it. And, you know, I feel like that alone was like a reason for me to not want to use a disposable coffee cup, just not liking to use them. And then it just seemed kind of silly that like I have so many travel mugs and regular and things like that. Like, why would I use a disposable one? I get this goes back to the whole like convenience thing, is so many people just take it to go, where I was like, man, if I'm going to bring my coffee cup to the coffee shop to fill it up, I might as well just spend $20 for a pound of their coffee and just make like 50 cups of coffee at home, save a lot more money, generate a lot less waste. And I know when we all, the biggest pushback I get is people don't have time to try and reduce waste in their life. But I guarantee if you do this terrifying thing of looking at your cell phone, like how much time you spend on different apps like Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and Reddit and whatever, you probably actually do have time to start being a little bit more mindful of some of the disposable items that you're using on a regular basis. So
You mentioned coffee, and that was something that, my husband and I, we really like really good coffee, and so we got a small espresso maker, not an espresso, like a real one with the grinder and the beans
yeah,
and and first of all, we have so much more control over the quality of the coffee. We can make sure that we're buying fair trade and organic and all of that good stuff. But it is actually faster to make it. Yes, it takes a little bit of time to learn how to do it, but my 6-year-old knows how to use it. I mean, it's you once you learn, you can do it. He loves to sometimes make us
yeah,
coffee in the morning. And, it was an upfront investment, but we've had it for over 10 years, this espresso machine. And we have our coffee before we leave the house. We don't have to go somewhere. We don't have to drive to a coffee shop on our way to some other place. Like there's very little waste. I mean, obviously there's some waste, but there's very little waste. And we just had to kind of get over that hurdle. And then that was a really easy way for us to
sure.
make a change like that.
Yeah, I had a friend. This was like over 10 years ago now. Like this was start when Starbucks was more affordable, but she had this. It was a habit. It was like a habit of going to Starbucks at least once a day, 7 days a week, but sometimes even twice a day. And I remember doing. She'd get a latte and a lemon loaf, and like, and then sometimes she'd go get a second latte later in the day. And I remember like, I was like, you could buy like a $50 or $100 espresso maker, and I calculated she was spending like $3,000 a year just on coffee at Starbucks, and it was like kind of eye opening because she didn't really think about it when you just. And I'm sure these things are twice as expensive today as they were 10 years ago, but like 250. It was like 250 for a small latte, and 250 for a lemon. It was like $5 a day or something. But then she was. You can do the I can do the you do the quick math, right? I guess that's like $1,500 a day, right, or a year, right there. And sometimes you go twice. I don't know. It was like $3,000 a year, and a lot of us, like to your point, it's a cost thing, but it's also a time. It's a you know takes a lot of money, but also takes a lot of time to do a lot of these things. So sometimes just getting more of a zero waste mindset is just more of like a holistic way of looking at what you're buying and how you're buying it. I know it's a big like retail therapy, right? Like people, they want to go, just they love shopping, so it's like they always want. That's what like fast fashion really played on people, is like, oh, people love, they're addicted to shopping. I personally hate shopping. That's why I wear just like plain colored clothing, because I don't like it. I don't know. Like it's sometimes it's bad though, because you look at pictures of me from 10 years ago and I'm wearing the same color jeans, same color shirt, same watch, same everything, right? And it's like, I mean, I think it's great because I spend a lot less money on clothing than a lot of people do, but I know that a lot of people look at that and they're just like, ugh, that's like boring. You wear the same thing. But even my girlfriend's been like trying to reduce the amount of clothes that she has, because she realizes that she wears like the same handful of items. It's like, 80%, 90% of the time, and yet she's got a big closet filled with clothes that just never get used. So, you know, so a lot of reducing waste is like, looking at our habits as well.
Hmm. So I know that you don't like to shop, but obviously we all wear clothes. Do you have a favorite clothing item, something that you really love and that you wear all the time?
I do, but it's a little bit of I don't know if it's a cop out here. It's actually out of reach. Give me 1 second.
Oh,
But
okay.
I don't wear it. I mean, I wear it when it's cold out, but I have this wool sweater. It's from California. It was my grandfather's. It's, he passed away nearly 30 years ago. So I believe it's from the 80s. And it's like, my memories of him fade with time because I was pretty young when he passed away. But it's a way when it's very cold out and I want to feel snuggly and warm, and I can put it on. And didn't cost me anything because it was just a hand me down, but it was obviously very high quality because 35, 40 years later, it's still like, I don't wear it that often, but it still works. So um, that would be what I say. That's what I would say would be like the one thing. Because I was really thinking about it, because generally speaking, I wear plain colored t-shirts or polos like 95% of the time. And even when I want to go out and like wear like a button-up shirt, I have like blue or navy blue or gray are like the two that I seem to be rotating most of the time. So I'm definitely more on the simple side, but I appreciate I and it's even hard for me because I'm not a fan. Um, I'm not a fan of like thrift store shopping because it's like I don't enjoy the hunt. A lot of people enjoy the hunt of going through the racks. I don't enjoy that at all. So I just try to buy, and since I don't know really a lot about clothing, sustainability, or like ethical purchasing and clothing, I tend to my advice, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, is I try to keep things that are like as plain as like logo free, so that way it's the most
Mm.
timeless. But I tell people that they should just try to buy the highest quality clothes that they can afford so that they will last the longest amount of time. And that's my advice because I don't know what the conditions were like for the person who made the clothing that I'm wearing. Right. I know
Yeah.
we generally speaking it's not good, but that's the way I try to go. So
That's great. I think that that's really great advice. One tip I'll give you, since you're kind of like a t-shirt, like simple guy, check out Pact. I don't know if you've heard about Pact,
I haven't.
but they're organic and fair trade. So it's for basics. I mean, it's
Hmm.
where my husband gets all of his t-shirts. He's kind of the same. He wears black or white t-shirts, usually with some, jeans that I thrifted for him. And, you know, that's kind of his like daily uniform.
Yeah.
But Pact is really great for those basics. So they are well made and but I just really like knowing that they're organic and fair trade personally.
Yeah.
So I
That's cool.
recommend that. Um, but yeah, I mean, being a minimalist with your wardrobe, I mean, I think that there's nothing wrong with that. I think that there are a lot of people that are trying to embrace that more too as a way to consume less clothing and also just to reduce decision fatigue and figuring out, what people are going to wear. It's funny, I had a whole conversation with one of my sons recently about logos because, my kids, almost everything they wear is secondhand. And I actually got a bag of clothes for him from a neighbor through the Buy Nothing group, which I'm a big proponent of. We swap kids' clothes, but it's really mostly women's stuff at this point. And so our kids section isn't huge. And so I do sometimes, go outside of Swap Society to clothe my very rapidly growing children. And he got some hoodies and there was a lot of Adidas in the bag and, and some Under Armour but these hoodies with like giant logos on them. And so I was giving him my perspective on that. I was like, I don't know if you've noticed, but I personally don't really wear a lot of things with logos on them. Um, I've long had the thought and perspective of, I'm not getting paid by that company to advertise for them. And for me, I care more about style than what the label is. So I was giving this whole spiel to him,
How old is he?
9,
Nice.
which led him to just and it resonated with him. It wasn't that long, but it was like, it resonated with him. And then he was like, oh, I hate this giant logo. And then I was like, but it's secondhand. Just,
Yeah.
it's fine. Just wear it. It's a good garment. We
Yeah.
got it. Let's keep it, and then I was like, oh, yeah, like that's a good philosophy when you're buying new stuff. But sometimes there's also like, oh, but we already have this and it already exists. And let's just use it. We won't buy that new like that, but wear it anyway. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
man,
I hear you. I hear you.
so what's inspiring you these days?
So, like I said, everything I do is legislation based. All the work I is be careful what I say because you want to bite the hand that feeds you. But most of my clients probably would not hire us to do the work that we're doing if it wasn't for a law or a contract or something that said they had to do it. So, that's always a little tedious. I mean, it's always a little tedious and it's getting me harder. Like I said, when it's harder to recycle things, that means it's more expensive to recycle things, which means that there's less of a financial incentive when these companies were collecting recycling and selling it. They wanted they like get all these recyclables into this blue bin because we're making money off this thing. It helps fund their programs, helps fund cities, fund things. Now, it costs the same, sometimes even more to process recycling than it does to landfill, which means that that makes it harder to recycle, right? Because you're going to have people that are going to just put it in landfill because it's less expensive or the same price, less work. So the law, SB 1383, the truth in labeling of recycling. Not all the laws I'm a fan of because I think sometimes they're just too tedious, too confusing, too whatever. But I have hope. When you look at the amount of organic waste, we tend to focus on plastic because plastic doesn't go away. So that's what you see in the street, you see it in the ocean, you see it on the beach, you see it everywhere, right? So that's has the biggest like visual impact on people. But really, from a greenhouse gas climate change standpoint, it's the organic material that's really the bigger thing in my mind to focus on. And Senate Bill 1383 regulates is trying to limit short-lived climate pollutants like methane gas by reducing waste to landfill, by increasing recycling, creating more opportunities to donate edible food that would otherwise be disposed. Because obviously, composting edible food, you're still throwing it away, right? Even if it's composted, there's still a lot of resources went into growing the food, manufacturing the products. So seeing this legislation specifically has created so much opportunity for consultants like me to work with waste haulers and cities and large generators, like sports venues, like baseball. I worked with baseball stadiums, large music venues, a lot of these like really big generators of waste. Just seeing this legislation kind of create the framework that allows us to go into these large generators and help them create actual systems to reduce their waste. And I'm really big at helping them do anything I can to show them that they can actually try to save money by either adjusting their way they have their waste collection set up, or also by going back through their supply chain and identifying some of these items that are taking up a lot of generating a lot of indirect expense by just kind of being there. So really quickly, an example would be like I don't know, like any disposable item at like a restaurant. They're constantly some manager somewhere is managing inventory. They're constantly buying inventory, trying to put it somewhere just to serve it one time and throw it away. And if you can replace it with a reusable item, you purchase less material, you spend less time buying stuff, less time storing things, and less time taking out the trash. So there's actually a lot of operational savings as well. So I'm excited that, at least in California, the laws are finally, I think, to a point where they're, empowering people like who do the work that I do, people who do what you do, to actually be able to get in there and work with these businesses. Like, you can't use the excuse now that someone's going to get sick and sue you if you donate the food, because there's laws in place that protect you. There's guidelines that the health departments throughout the state have set up that protect you if you follow them. So, the infrastructure is finally there. We're going to start seeing some progress on, mislabeling of items as recyclable that really aren't recyclable. We're starting to see progress on getting edible food recovery programs in place and really showing these businesses that just throw away a lot of food. I remember working with a grocery chain. They're like, we don't throw away edible food. And then I went to the landfill and I took a video while their trash compactor was being emptied. And I could have walked up to some of that food in the landfill, picked up and taken a bite out of it. That's how perfect it was. And it was such an eye-opening experience for that vice president of this company, because he started yelling at me because he was adamant that they do not waste food. And then what did he see? A video of his company wasting food. So that's what I'm excited about. Like, there's so much innovation. And I know we're talking about the textile people. I think they're, until they can process a lot more material than they can process, they're not really going to have a golden idea. But I see the amount of innovation that's out there trying to help divert material that would otherwise just be discarded in a landfill. So that's what I'm excited about. That was a long way to answer that question. So sorry.
Oh no, it's great. And then, I personally have a lot of eco anxiety, just thinking about, we're living through this mass extinction and the climate crisis is happening right in front of our eyes, and it can be very doom and gloom and stressful. And it's part of why I'm doing this podcast, really, because I want to highlight that people are doing stuff. People are working on these problems, and it's not hopeless. And so I'm just wondering, what's keeping you feeling optimistic these days?
I mean, really, I feel like we've been talking about it. Like, I feel like now more than ever, when, like I said, like 2/3 of all the recyclables in America were being shipped to China. And when they just stopped accepting them, we had to, for the first time probably ever, come to reality, like a reality check. We had to confront our waste because we couldn't just ship it across the world and consider it recycled. And there's been a lot of growing pains, but I think it's also created a lot of opportunity because a lot of people, like, people who probably are listening to your podcast, a lot of people in Southern California are in our Zero Waste LA Facebook group. And a lot of these people, they want to do the right thing. And hearing that, like, the material they thought was getting recycled, not get recycled, gets a lot of people really upset. But I think that really helps then drive the innovation and the change because people really want to do the right thing. I don't think most people say, oh, I want to litter, I want to create all this pollution, I want to throw all this single-use stuff away. But until we were faced with it because we couldn't just ship it somewhere else and just consider it recycled, I think that it really has created a lot of opportunity.
Great. And finally, how can people find you?
You can just, find me on Instagram at Zero Waste Guy, or on Facebook at Zero Waste Guy, or on the internet, zerowasteguy.com. Definitely, I don't generate a lot of content these days because it's, I'm spend so much time working in waste. It's hard to take the time, as to create content. Whatever you're doing takes 5 to 10 times longer if you're trying to document it to share it on a social media platform. So, but it's definitely a great way to send me a message, ask me a question, send me, an email through my website, something like that.
And I'm assuming businesses can reach out to you through those platforms as well if they'd like to employ you for your fabulous services.
I'm happy to help. I mean, if nothing else, I just like to show people, like, just take a look into your waste stream and try to categorize for people what they think is recyclable, versus what is actually getting recycled. And that oftentimes is the most enlightening thing. When people hear those stats that 50-60% of what gets put in a recycle bin doesn't get recycled, it's usually pretty horrifying. And oftentimes educating people on the materials that are not actually recyclable helps them make better purchasing decisions. So that way the less non-recyclable items you put into the recycle stream, that's really it's contaminating it. So the less contamination you put into the recycle stream, the more effective those processors are going to be at recovering the material. So less is more. Less is better in this case.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to chat with us.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to see you. And, thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks, you too. Have a good night.
Thank you for listening to the Swap Society podcast. Swap Society is an online clothing swap for women and kids that makes it easy and affordable to mix up your wardrobe sustainably. We're a growing community of women across the USA who are creating positive change by swapping our clothes and slowing down our fashion consumption. We would love to swap with you. If you're interested in joining, you can sign up at our website. Learn more at www.swapsociety.co. That's swapsociety.co. You can find the show notes for each episode on our website. Please get in touch with us on social media too. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and YouTube for the video version of this podcast at Swap Society. Music is by Joel Korolitz and yours truly. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Please help us spread the word by subscribing, leaving a rating and review, sharing on social media, or simply telling a friend. We really appreciate your support. Have a wonderful day, and remember to swap before you shop.